What if I told you that a single motel room held secrets so dark that it took nearly 40 years for someone to finally hear the voices calling from behind its walls? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Picture this. It's October 15th, 1986, and the Desert Rose Motel sits like a forgotten relic along a dusty Arizona highway. The kind of place where travelers stop for one night and try to forget they were ever there. Room 107. Just another numbered door in a row of peeling paint and broken dreams. But on this particular night, something happened in that room that would haunt investigators for decades to come. 11-year-old Marcus Hendricks was traveling with his mother, Sarah, on what should have been a routine family road trip. Has this ever happened to you? That moment when everything seems perfectly normal, and then, in the blink of an eye, your entire world shatters? Sarah had stepped outside to take a phone call from her ex-husband, leaving Marcus safely tucked inside their room with his favorite tape recorder playing soft music to calm his travel anxiety. When she returned just 15 minutes later, the window was wide open. The tape recorder was still spinning its gentle melody, and her son had vanished without a trace. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. No screams heard by neighboring guests. It was as if Marcus had simply evaporated into the desert night, leaving behind only questions that would echo through the corridors of this rundown motel for years to come. The police arrived within hours, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their methodical search revealing absolutely nothing. No fingerprints on the window frame, no footprints in the gravel outside, no witnesses who had seen anything unusual. The case went cold faster than most missing children investigations, filed away and dusty. Cabinets alongside hundreds of other unsolved disappearances that plague our highways every year. But here's where the story takes its first strange turn. And stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. The motel manager, a man who claimed to notice every loose screw and cracked tile in his establishment, somehow never reported a broken vent cover in room 107. A vent cover that, according to maintenance records, had been perfectly intact just days before Marcus disappeared. For nearly 4 decades, room 107 remained just another cold case, another family destroyed by unanswered questions, another child's face that would fade from missing person posters and evening news segments. Sarah Hendricks never stopped searching. Never stopped believing that somewhere out there, her son was still alive, still waiting to be found. She kept his room exactly as he left it, his clothes still folded in drawers, his favorite books still waiting on nightstands. But some stories refuse to stay buried, especially when they're hiding in plain sight behind the thin walls of roadside motels. Sometimes it takes a fresh pair of eyes, someone willing to sleep in room 107 and listen to the whispers that previous investigators missed. Someone brave enough to look behind that mysteriously unreported broken vent and discover what was never meant to be found. What lurked behind those walls would prove that Marcus Hendricks' disappearance was just the beginning of something far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. A systematic operation that had been hiding in plain sight, using America's countless roadside motels as the perfect cover for crimes that would shake investigators to their core. The truth was waiting in room 107, and it was about to speak. Fast forward to August 6, 2025, and something remarkable happens. A true crime podcaster named Nathan Cross makes a decision that would transform everything we thought we knew about this case. Nathan wasn't just another content creator chasing viral stories. He was someone driven by an unshakable belief that hidden truths have a way of revealing themselves to those willing to listen. The Desert Rose Motel looked exactly as it had decades earlier, as if time had simply forgotten to move forward in this corner of Arizona. The same U-shaped layout sprawled across cracked asphalt, the same numbered doors bore their faded stencil paint, and room 107 sat there waiting, like a patient keeper of secrets. Nathan's journey to this moment had been months in the making, poring over police reports, interviewing retired detectives, and following leads that others had dismissed as dead ends. When Nathan stepped into room 107 that evening, something immediately felt wrong. Not supernatural wrong, but acoustically wrong. The sound quality was unlike any motel room he'd ever recorded in. His voice seemed to get swallowed by the walls in ways that defied explanation, as if the room itself was designed to muffle sounds. For someone whose livelihood depended on crystal-clear audio recordings, this was more than just an inconvenience. It was a revelation, waiting to be understood. As Nathan methodically set up his recording equipment, his investigative mindset kicked into overdrive. The discolored patch near the ceiling that he'd read about in old maintenance reports wasn't just visible. It was practically screaming for attention. The vent cover hung at an odd angle, held by screws that clearly didn't match the original hardware. Someone had been here before, someone had removed this cover, and someone had very carefully put it back in a way that looked normal to casual observers, but told a completely different story to trained eyes. The impact of what Nathan was discovering hit him gradually. This wasn't just about documenting a cold case for his podcast audience. The physical evidence was painting a picture of deliberate concealment, of secrets hidden in plain sight for nearly 4 decades. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a routine missing child case, there were layers of deception that no previous investigator had bothered to peel back. Nathan realized that his transformation from podcaster to active investigator was complete the moment he decided to examine that vent cover more closely. The decisions that led him to this room, to this moment, suddenly felt like destiny rather than coincidence. Every instinct told him that Marcus Hendrick's disappearance was connected to something much larger, something that had been carefully orchestrated and methodically covered up. Nathan's transformation from curious investigator to someone on the verge of a life-changing discovery happened in the space of a single evening. As he began his initial recording session, something extraordinary occurred that would forever alter his understanding of what had really happened in room 107. The rhythmic clicking sounds that emerged from behind the vent weren't random. They had a pattern, a mechanical precision that suggested something deliberate was at work. The impact of hearing those sounds was immediate and visceral. Nathan's investigative mindset, honed by years of chasing stories others had given up on, told him this wasn't just old buildings settling or HVAC equipment malfunctioning. These were sounds with purpose, sounds that had been waiting decades for someone to finally notice them. But what sent chills down his spine wasn't the mechanical clicking, it was what came after. A child's voice, barely audible, whispered words he couldn't quite make out. The revelation hit Nathan like a physical blow. This wasn't his imagination, wasn't audio pareidolia where your brain tricks you into hearing voices in random noise. His professional recording equipment was capturing something real, something that had been trapped behind those walls for nearly 40 years. The hidden truth he'd been searching for was literally speaking. To him, Nathan's journey had prepared him for shocking discoveries, but nothing had prepared him for this moment when the past reached out and made contact with the present. Behind the scenes of what everyone believed was a cold case with no evidence, there was actually a treasure trove of information waiting for someone with the right mindset and determination to uncover it. The decisions Nathan made in those next few hours would prove crucial. Rather than rushing to remove the vent cover, immediately, he waited until darkness fell over the motel. His instincts told him that whatever was hidden behind that wall had been placed there by someone who understood the importance of secrecy. The transformation from curious podcaster to active detective was complete as he carefully unscrewed the mismatched hardware holding the vent in place. What Nathan discovered changed everything. Nestled inside the ductwork, deliberately positioned and carefully preserved, was a cassette tape with weathered edges and faded lettering. The label, written in careful script, read, "Room 107, do not erase." The implications were staggering. Someone had intentionally hidden this tape, someone had wanted it preserved, and someone had taken great care to ensure it would survive decades of neglect. The revelations contained on that tape would prove that Marcus Hendrick's disappearance was just the tip of an iceberg that stretched back years and involved a network of individuals working with calculated precision. Nathan held in his hands physical evidence that previous investigators had missed, evidence that would expose a systematic operation hiding in plain sight along America's highways. When Nathan pressed play on that weathered cassette tape, The transformation from investigative curiosity to horrifying reality happened in an instant. The audio quality was surprisingly clear, as if whoever had made this recording understood the importance of preserving every word, every inflection, every terrifying detail of what was happening in room 107 all those years ago. The first voice Nathan heard was calm, measured, almost hypnotically gentle in its delivery. But the words, coming from this adult male, were anything but gentle. "The night is pretend, Marcus," the voice instructed with chilling patience. "Remember what we practiced about the castle room." The impact of hearing these phrases was immediate and nauseating. This wasn't random abuse. This was systematic, conditioning, psychological manipulation delivered with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. Marcus's voice, small and frightened, responded exactly as he had been trained. The hidden truth Nathan was uncovering revealed a level of psychological control that went far beyond simple kidnapping. Behind the scenes of what everyone believed was a spontaneous crime, there was evidence of a carefully orchestrated program designed to break down a child's resistance and reshape their understanding of reality itself. But the revelations didn't stop there. As Nathan continued listening, his mindset shifted from shock to cold determination. A second male voice entered the recording, and their conversation changed everything about how this case needed to be understood. These men weren't just abusing Marcus, they were documenting the process, discussing their methods with the casual professionalism of colleagues planning a business meeting. "We need to be more careful." About the recordings, the second voice stated matter-of-factly, "Hide them better this time." The first voice responded with details about concealment methods, about rotating locations, about lessons learned from previous operations. Nathan's journey into this investigation had started with one missing child, but what he was hearing suggested a network of perpetrators who had been perfecting their techniques across multiple victims and multiple locations. The decisions these men had made to record their crimes would prove to be their ultimate undoing. But it had taken nearly 4 decades for someone with the right combination of curiosity and courage to discover their mistake. The systematic nature of their operation was becoming clear through their own words, preserved on magnetic tape like a confession they never intended to make public. If investigations like Nathan's resonate with you, the kind that dig beyond surface explanations to uncover institutional truths, subscribing means you'll be here every time we explore cases where one person's courage changed everything. This community values depth over quick answers, and that's exactly the mindset these stories deserve. Nathan realized that his discovery was just the beginning of unraveling something much larger. The phrases Marcus had been taught, the references to other rooms and other children, the casual discussion of hiding evidence, all of it pointed to an operation that had been running for years with the kind of organizational structure that only comes from experience and success. Nathan's transformation from someone investigating a single cold case to someone uncovering a massive criminal conspiracy happened gradually, then all at once. The professional quality of those recordings, the calculated way evidence had been concealed, the systematic approach to psychological conditioning, none of this was the work of an opportunistic predator. This was something far more sinister, an organized operation that had been perfecting its methods over years of practice. The hidden truth Nathan was piecing together demanded a complete shift in mindset. Behind the scenes of what law enforcement had treated as isolated incidents, there was actually a coordinated network that understood how to exploit the anonymity of America's highway motel system. The impact of this revelation changed everything about how Nathan approached his investigation. He wasn't just documenting Marcus Hendricks' disappearance anymore, he was exposing a criminal enterprise. Nathan's journey into the historical records of the Desert Rose Motel revealed patterns that previous investigators had completely missed. The old guest registry ledgers, gathering dust in a storage room, contained the smoking gun that would prove this operation's scope. 3 names appeared repeatedly in the years surrounding Marcus's disappearance: Mr. Anderson, David Porter, and Robert Hayes. But what made Nathan's blood run cold wasn't just the frequency of these bookings, it was the handwriting. All three aliases were written in identical script, the same person signing different names with the casual confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. The decisions this perpetrator had made to maintain detailed records would prove to be a critical mistake. Between 1984 and 1987, these three fake identities had reserved room 107 dozens of times, always paying in cash, always staying just 1 or 2 nights, always during periods when children had gone missing across the region. The revelations kept building as Nathan cross-referenced these dates with missing persons reports from surrounding counties. The pattern was undeniable and terrifying in its precision. Within 48 hours of each room 107 booking under these aliases, a child would disappear from a town within a 100-mile radius. The systematic nature of these disappearances suggested a level of planning and coordination that challenged everything law enforcement thought they knew about predatory behavior. Nathan realized that his discovery was exposing a mobile operation that had been using motels as temporary bases for hunting children across multiple states. The transformation in his understanding was complete when he recognized that room 107 wasn't just a crime scene, it was infrastructure. These perpetrators had specifically chosen this room, modified it for their purposes, and returned to it repeatedly because it served their operational needs perfectly. The behind-the-scenes logistics of this criminal network were becoming clearer with each piece of evidence Nathan uncovered. The identical handwriting across multiple aliases, the strategic timing of bookings, the careful concealment of evidence. All of it pointed to an organization with enough experience and resources to operate across state lines without detection for years. Nathan's investigation expanded beyond Arizona as he began mapping the geographic spread of disappearances against the motel booking patterns. The transformation from a single cold case to a multi-state criminal conspiracy became undeniable when he plotted the data across 3 states. Within a 100-mile radius of the Desert Rose Motel, at least 6 children had vanished between 1984 and 1987, and every single disappearance occurred within 48 hours of a room 107 booking under one of those 3 fake names. The impact of this discovery was staggering. Nathan realized he wasn't just investigating Marcus Hendrick's case anymore. He was uncovering evidence of a coordinated traveling operation that had been systematically targeting children across state lines. The hidden truth was that these perpetrators had turned America's interstate highway system into their hunting ground, using motels as temporary bases while they selected and stalked their victims. Behind the scenes of what local law enforcement had treated as separate, unrelated cases, there was actually a single criminal network operating with military-like precision. The decisions these predators had made to maintain detailed records, to use the same room repeatedly, to follow consistent patterns, all of it was now working against them as Nathan connected dots that no previous investigator had thought to draw. The journey to find living witnesses who could provide physical descriptions of these perpetrators led Nathan to Martha Carey, the former motel owner's daughter who had worked the front desk during those crucial years. Martha's memory proved to be remarkably sharp, and her description of one particular regular guest was so detailed and distinctive that it sent chills through Nathan's entire investigation. The man Martha remembered had a prosthetic eye that never quite moved in sync with his real one, creating an unsettling effect that made guests uncomfortable. He always wore white cotton gloves, even in the scorching Arizona heat, and carried with him an ever-present blue duffel bag that he never let out of his sight. Most memorably, he had a strong antiseptic smell, like someone who had just scrubbed surgical instruments or cleaned a medical facility. Martha's revelations provided the physical evidence Nathan needed to transform his investigation from theory to actionable intelligence. The systematic nature of this man's behavior, the way he had appeared at the motel dozens of times over several years, always with the same bag, always with the same careful attention to cleanliness and anonymity, painted a picture of someone who understood the importance of leaving no trace while maintaining operational security. The mindset shift for Nathan was profound, as he realized that Martha's description matched witness accounts from other missing children cases across the region. This wasn't just one predator working alone. This was someone with enough confidence and experience to maintain a consistent operational pattern across multiple states and multiple years without ever being caught. A like on this video tells me that this level of detailed investigation is what connects with you, not just the surface story, but the institutional patterns and hidden connections that explain how systematic evil can operate in plain sight. It helps me understand that you value content that respects your intelligence and doesn't shy away from complex realities. Nathan's journey to find Sarah Hendricks led him to a small house where time seemed to have, stopped on October 15th, 1986. Sarah's transformation from a hopeful mother to someone haunted by decades of unanswered questions was evident in every carefully preserved corner of her home. When Nathan described Martha's detailed account of the mysterious regular guest, Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral. Recognition flashed across her face like lightning. The hidden truth that Sarah had been carrying for nearly 40 years suddenly found its voice. She remembered that night with startling clarity now that Nathan had given her the right prompts. There had been a helpful stranger in the motel parking lot when Marcus was having one of his travel meltdowns. The man had approached them with genuine-seeming concern, offering assistance while Sarah struggled with their luggage and her distressed son. Behind the scenes of what Sarah had always remembered as a moment of human kindness, Nathan now recognized the calculated approach of a predator who had been watching and waiting for the perfect opportunity. The impact of Sarah's revelation was devastating in its simplicity. This man had worn white cotton gloves despite the Arizona heat, and she distinctly remembered the sharp chemical smell that seemed to follow him like an invisible cloud. The decisions this predator had made to insert himself into Marcus's life before the actual abduction showed a level of psychological manipulation that went far beyond opportunistic crime. Nathan realized that Sarah and Marcus had been under surveillance, studied, assessed as suitable targets long before that terrible night when everything changed forever. Nathan's mindset shifted completely when Sarah mentioned one more crucial detail. The helpful stranger had carried Marcus's suitcase right to the door of room 107, had seen exactly where they were staying, had even smiled at Marcus in a way that seemed so genuinely caring at the time. The systematic nature of this approach revealed someone who understood how to gain trust, how to appear helpful, how to position himself perfectly for what would happen later. But Nathan's most shocking discovery was yet to come. When he returned to room 107 for a more thorough search of the wall cavity, he found something that made his blood run cold. Hidden deeper in the ductwork was a second cassette tape, this one containing audio that would prove the conditioning of Marcus had been far more extensive and systematic than the first recording had revealed. The revelations on this second tape exposed a structured program designed specifically to break down children's psychological resistance and implant behaviors that would ensure compliance and silence. Nathan listened in horror as the same calm male voice walked Marcus through exercises designed to fragment his sense of reality, to make him question his own memories, to accept a new identity that had been carefully constructed to serve his captor's purposes. The transformation Nathan witnessed in Marcus's voice across these recordings was heartbreaking, from a frightened but defiant child to someone who had learned to parrot back the phrases and responses his captors demanded. The behind-the-scenes methodology revealed someone with extensive knowledge of psychological conditioning techniques, someone who had clearly done this before and would undoubtedly do it again. Nathan's investigation took a devastating turn when his examination of the shared wall between rooms 107 and 108 revealed something that would haunt him forever. The transformation from investigating hidden tapes to discovering an actual concealed chamber marked a shift from disturbing audio evidence to physical proof of prolonged captivity. Using his knowledge of the building's acoustics and the strange sound-dampening properties he'd noticed, Nathan realized that someone had deliberately modified the structure to create a hiding space. The impact of what Nathan found in that hidden chamber was overwhelming, carefully preserved. In a makeshift envelope was a letter written in a child's shaky handwriting, addressed simply to Mom. Marcus had managed to write to his mother during his captivity, describing his attempts to signal for help through the walls, his efforts to stay brave, and his unwavering belief that Sarah would find him. The hidden truth contained in those innocent words revealed the extent of Marcus's psychological resilience, even under unimaginable circumstances. Behind the scenes of what everyone believed was a quick abduction and probable murder. Nathan discovered evidence that Marcus had been held in this concealed space for an extended period. The letter described hearing footsteps in the adjacent room, the sound of television through thin walls, and Marcus's desperate attempts to knock and signal to other guests who might hear him. The systematic nature of this concealment showed a level of planning that went far beyond opportunistic crime. Nathan's journey into the deeper mysteries of this case led him to examine public records with a completely different mindset. The decisions these perpetrators had made to modify Room 107 would have required permits, contractors, official paperwork. What Nathan discovered in the county building department files was a revelation that connected this case to an institution no one had previously suspected. The structural repair permits for Room 107 had been filed under a real name, Robert Carson, youth pastor at Sunrise Fellowship. The eerie transformation in Nathan's understanding was immediate and chilling. This wasn't just a criminal hiding behind aliases anymore. This was someone with an established public identity, someone trusted by families in the community, someone whose professional role gave him direct access to vulnerable children. The impact of this discovery extended far beyond just identifying a suspect. Nathan realized that Carson's position at Sunrise Fellowship provided the perfect cover for his criminal activities. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a dedicated religious leader working with at-risk youth, there was actually a predator who had been using his institutional authority to identify, groom, and ultimately target children, whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed or thoroughly investigated. Carson's dangerous overconfidence in filing permits under his real name revealed someone who believed his public persona made him untouchable. The revelations Nathan was uncovering suggested that Carson had been operating with impunity for years, protected by the trust and respect his religious position afforded him in the community. Nathan's transformation from investigating a single predator to uncovering an entire network reached a shocking new level when he gained access to Sunrise Fellowship's archived records. The decision to dig deeper into Carson's professional background revealed something that changed everything about how this case needed to be understood. Hidden among routine church documents, Nathan discovered a cassette tape labeled Pastoral Training Materials that would expose the true scope of this criminal organization. The fact that you stayed through this entire investigation tells me you're someone who appreciates when we take the time to fully understand complex realities, rather than rushing through simplified versions. Subscribing ensures you're part of every deep dive where we follow the evidence wherever it leads, no matter how uncomfortable the truth becomes. The impact of hearing that training tape was unlike anything Nathan had experienced in his investigative career. The audio contained systematic instructions for psychological conditioning techniques, complete with examples of how to assess children's compliance levels and resistance patterns. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be legitimate church youth work, there was actually a sophisticated program designed to identify vulnerable children and transform them into compliant victims through calculated psychological manipulation. Nathan's mindset shifted completely as he realized this wasn't just Carson operating alone. This was an organized network that had developed training materials, standardized procedures, and educational resources for breaking down children's psychological defenses. The hidden truth was that Sunrise Fellowship had been used as a front for something far more sinister than anyone in the community had ever suspected. The revelations on that training tape led Nathan to follow geographical clues mentioned in the audio recordings. References to Phase 2 and the mountain facility suggested that Room 107 was just the beginning of a process that continued elsewhere. Nathan's journey into the Rocklands Mountains, following coordinates gleaned from fragments of conversation on the tapes, led him to a discovery that would prove the systematic nature of this operation beyond any doubt. Thunder Ridge turned out to be an abandoned compound nestled deep in the mountains, accessible only by a dirt road that had been deliberately obscured from satellite imagery. The facility contained evidence of long-term operations, Multiple small beds arranged in dormitory-style rooms, restraint equipment mounted to walls, and a sophisticated recording studio that had clearly been used for documenting the conditioning process Nathan had heard on the tapes. The transformation in Nathan's understanding was complete when he realized that Thunder Ridge represented the next phase in the criminal network's operation. Children who had been initially processed through facilities like Room 107 were apparently brought here for more intensive conditioning. The decisions these perpetrators had made to establish a permanent remote facility showed a level of organization and long-term planning that challenged everything law enforcement thought they knew about predatory networks. Behind the scenes of what local communities believed were isolated missing children cases, Nathan had uncovered evidence of a systematic operation that had been moving victims through different phases of captivity and conditioning. The impact of this discovery was staggering. This network had the resources, planning, and infrastructure to operate like a criminal enterprise rather than individual predators. Nathan's exploration of Thunder Ridge took a devastating turn when he discovered what appeared to be a memorial garden hidden behind the main compound buildings. The transformation from investigative discovery to profound grief happened in an instant as Nathan realized what he was looking at. A line of simple stone markers, each bearing only initials and numbers, stretched across a small clearing like a grim accounting of lives stolen and destroyed. The impact of seeing M10 carved into weathered stone hit Nathan like a physical blow. Marcus Hendricks had been reduced to a number in this criminal network's twisted record-keeping system. But the hidden truth was even more disturbing. There were dozens of other markers, each representing a child whose disappearance had likely never been connected to this operation. The systematic nature of this memorial revealed that Thunder Ridge had been operational far longer than Nathan had initially suspected. Behind the scenes of what communities across multiple states had experienced as isolated tragedies, Nathan was discovering evidence of a coordinated network that had been cataloging their victims with the cold efficiency of a business operation. The decisions these perpetrators had made to memorialize their crimes showed a level of psychological detachment that was almost incomprehensible to Nathan's investigative mindset. But Nathan's journey into this nightmare was about to take an unexpected turn that would challenge everything he thought he knew about Marcus Hendricks' fate. 3 days after his discovery at Thunder Ridge, Nathan received an anonymous package at his hotel containing a mini DV tape with no markings except a single word scrawled in faded ink: Survivor. The revelations contained on that tape would prove that Marcus had not only survived his initial captivity, but had lived for 63 days within this criminal network's system. The video showed Marcus speaking directly to the camera with a maturity and awareness that was heartbreaking in someone so young. His transformation from the frightened child on the audio recordings to someone who understood exactly what was happening to him revealed the extent of psychological conditioning he had endured. Marcus's message provided crucial intelligence about how the network operated, describing multiple facilities, different phases of captivity, and most importantly, evidence that the operation was still active decades later. The impact of hearing Marcus's voice again, older and more aware but unmistakably the same child who had disappeared from room 107, was overwhelming for Nathan. The hidden truth that Marcus revealed in his video message was that some children who passed through this system were not killed, but were instead conditioned to become compliant participants in recruiting and processing new victims. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a network focused solely on abuse, there was actually a systematic program designed to create a self-perpetuating cycle where previous victims became instrumental in maintaining the operation's continued success. Marcus's video message contained a warning that would transform Nathan's investigation from a historical cold case into an urgent modern threat. The hidden truth Marcus revealed was that the criminal network hadn't disbanded after the 1980s cases. They had simply evolved, adapted their methods, and moved their operations to new locations. His description of a facility with a distinctive bell tower, where children were still being processed through the same systematic conditioning programs, meant that somewhere out there, this nightmare was continuing to unfold. The impact of realizing that this wasn't just a historical investigation hit Nathan with devastating force. Behind the scenes of what he had initially believed was exposing past crimes, Nathan was actually uncovering evidence of ongoing operations that were claiming new victims even as he conducted his research. The transformation in his mindset was immediate. This was no longer about justice for past victims. This was about stopping active predators who were using everything they had learned over decades of criminal experience. Nathan's journey to locate the facility Marcus had described became an obsession driven by the knowledge that every day of delay could mean another child falling into this network's hands. The decisions Nathan made during this phase of his investigation were guided by urgency rather than the methodical approach he had used for the historical research. Marcus's description of a bell tower attached to a religious retreat gave Nathan specific architectural details to search for using satellite imagery and property records. Grace Point Renewal Center emerged from Nathan's research as the most likely candidate for the current operational base. Located in a remote area similar to Thunder Ridge but with better access to highways and populated areas, the facility perfectly matched Marcus's description. The revelations Nathan uncovered about Grace Point showed that this criminal network had learned from their past mistakes and had chosen a location that provided both isolation and legitimacy. Nathan's transformation from historical investigator to active threat hunter was complete when he approached Grace Point and confirmed that it matched every detail from Marcus's warning. The facility appeared to be an active religious retreat, but with an eerily abandoned quality that suggested something wasn't quite right. Behind the scenes of what looked like a legitimate operation, Nathan could sense the same calculated infrastructure that he had discovered at Thunder Ridge and Room 107. The impact of finding Grace Point was both validation and horror. Validation that Marcus's intelligence was accurate, and horror at the realization that this criminal network had successfully reinvented itself for the modern era. The hidden truth was that they had maintained their core methodology while adapting to new technologies and contemporary institutional frameworks that provided even better cover for their operations. If this exploration of Nathan's journey changed how you think about missing children cases or institutional failures, letting me know with a like helps me continue creating content that goes beyond headlines to reveal the deeper truths that most people never hear. It's that simple feedback that keeps these in-depth investigations coming. Nathan's infiltration of Grace Point led him to a discovery that would haunt him forever. The transformation from investigating historical crimes to uncovering an active, modern operation happened the moment he found Studio 5. This wasn't the crude recording setup he had imagined based on the 1980s audio tapes. This was a professionally equipped facility with digital cameras, professional lighting, and sound equipment that rivaled commercial production studios. The impact of realizing that this criminal network had evolved with technology was staggering. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a simple religious retreat, Nathan discovered evidence that this operation had transformed into something far more sophisticated and dangerous than its historical incarnation. The hidden truth was that they had learned from decades of experience and had created a facility capable of producing high-quality digital content that could be distributed through modern networks. Nathan's mindset shifted completely when he found personal belongings scattered around Studio 5. Small items that clearly belonged to children, fresh enough to suggest recent use. The revelations contained in this single room proved that Marcus's warning had been accurate and urgent. This wasn't a historical investigation anymore. This was an active crime scene where children were currently being victimized using methods that had been refined over nearly 4 decades of criminal operation. The decisions Nathan made in those crucial moments of discovery would determine whether this network could continue operating or finally be exposed. His journey from podcast investigator to someone holding evidence of ongoing crimes required a fundamental transformation in his approach. Behind the scenes of what he had begun as historical research, Nathan was now gathering intelligence on active predators who represented an immediate threat to vulnerable children. The most chilling discovery came when Nathan found the case files. Modern documentation marked Candidate 54 with recent signatures from someone using the alias H. Richardson proved beyond any doubt that this criminal network was not only still active, but had maintained their systematic approach to selecting, processing, and documenting their victims. The impact of seeing current dates and fresh handwriting was like being struck by lightning. This horror was happening right now. Nathan realized that the network's transformation over the decades had made them more dangerous than ever. The revelations contained in those files showed that they had maintained their core methodology while adapting to modern technologies that allowed them to operate with greater efficiency and broader reach. The hidden truth was that everything Nathan had uncovered about their historical operations was just the foundation for understanding their current capabilities. The systematic nature of their current documentation revealed that they had never stopped learning, never stopped improving their methods, and never stopped finding new ways to exploit the institutional trust and technological infrastructure of modern society to continue their predatory operations. Nathan's decision to release Echoes from Room 107 as a podcast series would trigger a transformation in how law enforcement approached historical missing children cases across the entire country. The impact of his revelations was immediate and overwhelming. Within 72 hours of the first episode's release, Nathan's investigation had exploded into national consciousness with a viral intensity that surprised even him. Behind the scenes of what started as one man's quest for truth, a massive law enforcement mobilization was taking shape. The hidden truth Nathan had uncovered about the systematic nature of this criminal network resonated far beyond his initial audience. FBI cold case units, who had been struggling with decades of unsolved disappearances, suddenly had a framework for understanding patterns they had never been able to connect. The UN. Revelations contained in Nathan's podcast provided law enforcement with something they had never possessed before: a comprehensive roadmap of how this network operated, where they had been active, and, most crucially, evidence that they might still be operational. The transformation in investigative approach was immediate as agencies across multiple jurisdictions began reopening cases that had been dormant for decades. Nathan's journey from lone investigator to the catalyst for a nationwide criminal investigation happened faster than he could have imagined. The decisions he had made to meticulously document every piece of evidence, to preserve the audio recordings, and to present his findings with careful attention to detail gave law enforcement exactly what they needed to take decisive action. The impact on the criminal network was swift and devastating. Within weeks of the podcast's viral success, Grace Point Renewal Center was raided and seized. Sunrise Fellowship was dissolved. Pending investigation, and properties connected to the Thunder Ridge compound were secured as crime scenes. The systematic approach that had protected this network for decades suddenly became their greatest vulnerability as investigators used Nathan's research to trace their activities across multiple states and institutions. Behind the scenes of these high-profile raids and seizures, something even more significant was happening: the mindset shift in law enforcement regarding how to investigate. Organized predatory networks was transforming the entire approach to missing children cases. Nathan's revelations had proven that what appeared to be isolated incidents were often connected parts of larger criminal enterprises with sophisticated operational structures. The hidden truth that emerged from this massive investigation was that this particular network represented just one example of how organized criminals could exploit the gaps between jurisdictions, the trust placed in religious institutions, and the anonymity of America's highway system to operate with impunity for decades. Nathan's journey into exposing this criminal network took an unexpected and heartbreaking turn when he received a message that would forever change his understanding of the investigation's impact on survivors. The transformation from celebrating law enforcement's response to grappling with unintended consequences happened when someone identifying themselves as Subject 47 reached out through his podcast's secure contact system. The hidden truth about survivors that Nathan was forced to confront was devastating in its complexity. Behind the scenes of his successful exposure of this criminal network, Nathan discovered that some survivors who had managed to build new lives were being re-traumatized by the very revelations that were meant to bring them justice. The impact of hearing their own conditioning sessions broadcast to millions of listeners was more than many could psychologically handle. Nathan's mindset was fundamentally challenged when Subject 47 described the psychological distress that the podcast had triggered. The revelations Nathan thought would provide validation and closure for survivors were actually reopening wounds that had taken decades to heal. The decisions Nathan had made to include specific audio evidence, while crucial for law enforcement, had created an unintended consequence that haunted him profoundly. The transformation in Nathan's understanding deepened when Subject 47 suddenly broke off all communication after just 3 exchanges. The journey from initial contact to complete silence revealed the delicate balance between exposing truth and protecting those who had already suffered unimaginable trauma. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a straightforward quest for justice, Nathan was learning that some victories come with costs that are impossible to calculate in advance. But an even more disturbing revelation was unfolding. Simultaneously, despite the massive law enforcement response and media attention, the primary perpetrators seemed to have vanished like smoke. The impact of Nathan's investigation was becoming a double-edged sword. While it had exposed the network's existence, it had also given them advance warning that allowed key figures to disappear before authorities could apprehend them. The hidden truth that emerged from the raids was shocking in its implications. Grace Point Renewal Center had been systematically cleared of evidence just 3 days before the FBI arrived. Thunder Ridge showed signs of recent activity, but had been stripped of anything that could identify current operators. The decisions these criminals had made to monitor Nathan's podcast and prepare for exposure revealed a level of sophistication that law enforcement had underestimated. Nathan realized that his revelations had created a massive game of cat and mouse where the most dangerous elements of this network had used his own investigation as an early warning system. Behind the scenes of the celebrated law enforcement response, the people who had orchestrated decades of systematic abuse were adapting once again, learning from their exposure, and likely preparing to rebuild their operations with even greater security measures. Nathan's transformation from investigative podcaster to a target of dangerous forces became terrifyingly real as the consequences of his revelations began to manifest in his personal life. The hidden truth about exposing organized criminal networks was that they don't simply disappear when confronted. They fight back with resources and methods that most people never anticipate. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a successful investigation, Nathan was discovering that some secrets are protected by people willing to destroy anyone who threatens their continued operation. The impact of the threats Nathan received was both psychological and practical. Anonymous messages arrived with details about his daily routines, his family members, his home address, delivered with the calculated precision of people who understood exactly how to create maximum fear. The decisions Nathan faced about continuing his investigation versus protecting his own safety forced him to confront the reality that some journeys into institutional darkness come with personal costs that extend far beyond professional risk. But the threats weren't just from anonymous criminals trying to silence him. The revelations Nathan had exposed had implicated powerful people in positions of authority, and their response came through legal channels designed to discredit and overwhelm him. Subpoenas, cease and desist orders, and defamation lawsuits created a different kind of pressure that threatened to bankrupt Nathan's investigation before it could achieve lasting impact. Nathan's mindset during this period required constant transformation as he learned to navigate threats that came from multiple directions simultaneously. Behind the scenes of what the public saw as a triumphant exposure of criminal networks, Nathan was fighting a daily battle for survival against forces that had spent decades perfecting methods of silencing inconvenient investigators. The psychological toll of living under constant threat while trying to continue his work created an isolation that few people could understand. The journey from celebrated investigator to embattled target forced Nathan to make decisions about how much personal sacrifice was justified in pursuit of justice for victims who might never even know his name. Then, exactly 1 year after his original discovery in Room 107, Nathan received a package that would reignite his investigation in ways he never anticipated. The brass key contained within bore the simple engraving 108, the room adjacent to where Marcus had disappeared, the room that had been mysteriously sealed since 1987 and never reopened. The hidden truth behind. This delivery was that someone had been watching Nathan's investigation, someone who understood the significance of what he had uncovered, and someone who possessed access to secrets that even his exhaustive research had failed to reveal. The impact of holding that key was immediate and profound. Nathan realized that his journey into this criminal network's operations was far from over. Nathan's journey to understand the significance of Room 108 led him deep into property records and municipal archives that revealed a pattern of deliberate concealment spanning decades. The transformation in his investigation took a chilling turn when he discovered that Room 108 had been permanently sealed within 72 hours of Marcus's disappearance in 1986, with no official explanation ever provided to authorities or insurance companies. The hidden truth behind this immediate sealing was that someone with significant influence had been able to ensure that Room 108 would never be accessible to investigators, guests, or even routine maintenance staff. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a simple business decision, Nathan uncovered evidence of a calculated effort to protect whatever secrets that adjacent room contained. The impact of realizing that this concealment had been orchestrated while Marcus's case was still actively being investigated suggested a level of institutional protection that went far beyond what Nathan had previously imagined. Nathan's mindset shifted dramatically when he discovered that the sealing of Room 108 hadn't been a temporary measure. The revelations contained in decades of property maintenance records showed that this room had been deliberately maintained as inaccessible space, with regular payments made to ensure it remained undisturbed even as the rest of the motel underwent renovations and ownership changes. But the most disturbing discovery came when Nathan examined the final months before the Desert Rose Motel's demolition. The decisions that had been made during this period revealed that someone was still actively monitoring and protecting the secrets hidden in Room 108 right up until the building's destruction. 3 days before the scheduled demolition, a maintenance request had been filed reporting loose panels in Room 108 that required immediate attention. The transformation in Nathan's understanding was profound when he realized that this last-minute maintenance request hadn't been about structural repair. It had been about evidence removal. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be routine pre-demolition work, someone had gained access to Room 108 one final time to ensure that whatever it contained would never be discovered by demolition crews or investigators. Nathan's journey into these property records revealed that the criminal network he had been investigating possessed resources and institutional connections that extended far beyond what he had initially suspected. The impact of discovering that they had maintained surveillance and control over Room 108 for nearly 40 years was staggering. The hidden truth was that this wasn't just about covering up past crimes. It was about protecting ongoing operations that required absolute security. The revelations about the timing of that final maintenance request suggested that Nathan's own investigation might have triggered the decision to finally clear Room 108 of whatever evidence it contained. Behind the scenes of his celebrated exposure of this criminal network, Nathan was learning that they had been watching his progress and preparing contingencies long before he realized the scope of what he was uncovering. Nathan's investigation created something entirely unexpected that would transform his understanding of the true impact his work was having on survivors across the country. Behind the scenes of the high-profile law enforcement response and media coverage, a quiet but profound support network was forming among people who had survived this criminal network's operations. The hidden truth about trauma and healing that Nathan was discovering was that sometimes the most powerful transformation comes not from official justice, but from survivors finding each other. The revelations contained in Nathan's podcast had created a safe space for people who had spent decades believing they were alone with their experiences. The impact of hearing other survivors' stories, of recognizing the same conditioning phrases, and psychological manipulation techniques provided validation that many had never received from official investigations. Nathan's journey from lone investigator to facilitator of survivor connections became one of the most meaningful aspects of his entire investigation. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a straightforward criminal investigation, Nathan was learning that the decisions survivors make about coming forward are incredibly complex and personal. The transformation in his mindset happened when he realized that some survivors needed community and understanding more than they needed traditional justice. The support network that emerged organically from his podcast provided something that law enforcement investigations could never offer: genuine comprehension from people who had lived through similar experiences. But Nathan's journey also forced him to confront a harsh reality that challenged everything he had hoped to achieve through his investigation. Despite the extensive media coverage, the FBI task forces, the seized properties, and dissolved organizations, the primary organizers of this criminal network remained completely unidentified and at large. The impact of this realization was devastating for someone who had invested years of his life in exposing their operations. The hidden truth that emerged from months of investigation was that the people Nathan had been pursuing were far more sophisticated and well-protected than he had initially understood. The revelations about their ability to disappear evidence, to maintain institutional protection, and to operate across decades without leaving identifiable traces suggested a level of criminal organization that challenged traditional law enforcement methods. Nathan's transformation from optimistic investigator to someone grappling with the limitations of individual courage became a central part of his ongoing journey. Behind the scenes of what the public saw as a successful exposure of institutional evil, Nathan was learning that some criminal networks are designed to survive exposure, to adapt and evolve rather than simply collapse when confronted. The decisions Nathan faced about how to continue his work while accepting that complete justice might be impossible required a fundamental shift in his understanding of what victory looks like when confronting organized predatory networks. The mindset transformation was profound, from seeking definitive closure to building sustainable support systems for survivors who deserved recognition regardless of whether their abusers were ever held accountable. Nathan's investigation attracted attention from mental health professionals who recognized something unprecedented in the systematic conditioning techniques revealed through the recovered audio recordings. The transformation in understanding these psychological manipulation methods came when trauma specialists began analyzing the sophisticated programming that had been used on victims like Marcus. Behind the scenes of what many had assumed was crude abuse, researchers discovered evidence of advanced psychological conditioning techniques that challenged everything they thought they knew about predatory behavior. The hidden truth that emerged from this professional analysis was deeply disturbing. The revelations showed that this criminal network had employed methods typically associated with state-level psychological warfare and cult deprogramming, adapted specifically for use on children. The impact of this discovery transformed how mental health professionals understood the long-term effects on survivors, explaining why so many had struggled with fragmented memories, dissociative episodes, and difficulty trusting their own perceptions of reality. Nathan's journey into understanding the geographic scope of this operation revealed a level of criminal sophistication that law enforcement had never encountered before. The decisions these perpetrators had made to operate as a mobile network, constantly moving between motels and facilities across state lines, showed a mindset focused on long-term survival rather than quick exploitation. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be random disappearances across multiple states, there was actually a coordinated strategy designed to prevent any single jurisdiction from recognizing patterns. The transformation in Nathan's investigation came when geographic analysts mapped the movement patterns revealed through motel registries, property rentals, and survivor testimonies. The revelations contained in this data showed that the network had been operating like a traveling circus of horror, maintaining temporary bases in carefully selected locations that provided both access to vulnerable populations and easy escape routes when law enforcement attention became too focused. Nathan realized that the impact of this mobile strategy explained why this criminal network had been able to operate for decades without detection. The hidden truth was that they had understood jurisdictional limitations long before digital communication made coordination easier, using America's complex web of local, state, and federal law enforcement boundaries as protection against comprehensive investigation. The systematic nature of their geographic movement patterns revealed a level of planning that transformed Nathan's understanding of what he was truly confronting. Behind the scenes of what had appeared to be opportunistic predation, researchers discovered evidence of advanced scouting, demographic analysis, and careful selection of communities with specific vulnerabilities that made them ideal hunting grounds. The revelations about their psychological techniques combined with their geographic mobility painted a picture of criminal organization that operated more like a sophisticated intelligence operation than traditional predatory behavior. The transformation in how law enforcement approached similar cases was immediate and profound, as Nathan's research provided a framework for understanding how organized networks could exploit systemic weaknesses to operate across vast territories without ever being detected. Nathan's investigation exposed something that law enforcement officials found almost as disturbing as the criminal network itself: the systematic, institutional failures that had allowed this operation to continue for decades. The transformation in understanding how predatory networks exploit jurisdictional gaps came when Nathan mapped not just where crimes had occurred, but which agencies had investigated them, and how information had been shared between departments. The hidden truth revealed through Nathan's research was that this criminal network had been operating in plain sight, protected not by sophisticated concealment, but by the simple fact that no single law enforcement agency had ever seen the complete picture. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be diligent police work in dozens of jurisdictions, there was actually a catastrophic failure of communication that had allowed obvious patterns to remain invisible for decades. The impact of this revelation transformed how law enforcement approached multi-jurisdictional cases. Nathan's journey into institutional analysis showed that the same missing child case could be classified as a runaway in one county, a custody dispute in another, and a stranger abduction in a third, with no mechanism for recognizing that all three cases might be connected to the same traveling criminal network. The decisions that individual investigators had made to focus on local leads rather than seeking broader patterns weren't necessarily wrong in isolation, but collectively they had created a protective shield around organized predators who understood how to exploit these systemic weaknesses. The transformation in investigative protocols was immediate and comprehensive, as agencies realized they needed fundamentally different approaches to recognize and respond to mobile criminal networks. Behind the scenes of the public attention surrounding Nathan's podcast, a dedicated federal task force was quietly working to address the institutional failures his investigation had exposed. The revelations about communication gaps and jurisdictional blind spots had prompted the creation of new coordination mechanisms designed to prevent similar networks from operating undetected in the future. Nathan's work had provided this task force with something unprecedented: a comprehensive case study of how organized predators could exploit systemic weaknesses to operate across multiple states for decades. The impact of having this roadmap was transforming how investigators approached not just this specific network, but similar operations that might be currently active in communities across the country. The mindset shift within law enforcement was profound, as agencies recognized that the institutional frameworks they had been using were fundamentally inadequate for confronting modern organized crime. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be traditional criminal investigation, a complete reimagining of multi-jurisdictional cooperation was taking shape, driven by the understanding that individual heroism like Nathan's shouldn't be necessary to expose institutional evil. The ongoing investigation represented both hope and acknowledgement of how much work remained to be done. The hidden truth was that Nathan's discoveries had likely revealed just one network among many that were currently exploiting the same systemic vulnerabilities. Nathan's investigation created a transformation in how law enforcement approached missing children cases that extended far beyond the specific network he had exposed. The impact of his revelations reached into police academies, FBI training protocols, and interagency communication systems across the entire country. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a single podcast's success, there was actually a fundamental shift in institutional mindset that would protect countless children from similar networks in the future. The hidden truth about institutional change was that it required exactly the kind of comprehensive evidence Nathan had provided, not just proof that crimes had occurred, but detailed documentation of how systematic failures had enabled those crimes to continue undetected. The decisions law enforcement agencies made to implement new protocols were driven by the understanding that preventing future networks required addressing the vulnerabilities that had protected past ones. Nathan's journey from investigating one cold case to transforming national investigative procedures represented something unprecedented in the relationship between citizen journalism and institutional reform. The revelations contained in his podcast had provided law enforcement with a blueprint for recognizing organized predatory networks before they could establish the kind of long-term operations that had victimized Marcus and so many others. Behind the scenes of the procedural changes and protocol improvements, Nathan was grappling with how to bring his investigation to a meaningful conclusion for the survivors who had trusted him with their stories. The transformation in his understanding of what justice meant had led him to a final message that acknowledged both the limitations of traditional law enforcement and the power of survivor communities to create their own forms of healing and accountability. In his concluding podcast episode, Nathan spoke directly to survivors with a message that had been shaped by years of understanding how institutional systems could both fail and evolve. The impact of his words was immediate and profound as he assured them that their experiences were believed, their courage was recognized, and most importantly, they were no longer alone in carrying the burden of these secrets. But as Nathan delivered his final message in his Brooklyn studio, something extraordinary happened that would remind him that some investigations never truly end. The revelations he had uncovered continued to resonate in ways that defied explanation. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a completed investigation, there were still mysteries waiting to be discovered. As Nathan concluded his message to survivors, a series of soft knocking sounds began emanating from behind his studio wall, rhythmic, deliberate, almost like a response to everything he had shared. The hidden truth was that his investigation had opened channels of communication that extended far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. Those knocking sounds that Nathan heard in his studio represent something profound about the nature of truth and courage. When we choose to look beyond the surface of accepted narratives, when we decide to investigate the uncomfortable questions that others prefer to ignore, we often discover that reality is far more complex and interconnected than we ever imagined. Nathan's transformation from curious podcaster to someone who fundamentally changed how we understand organized crime didn't happen overnight. It required the same kind of persistent curiosity and willingness to follow evidence wherever it led that I try to bring to every investigation we explore together on this channel. The hidden truth is that most of the stories that reshape our understanding of institutional systems start with individuals who refuse to accept convenient explanations for uncomfortable realities. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey into Nathan's investigation, you understand that some discoveries demand the kind of detailed exploration that goes far beyond surface-level coverage. The impact of stories like this one extends far beyond entertainment. They provide frameworks for understanding how corruption, institutional failure, and organized evil can hide in plain sight, until someone with the right mindset decides to dig deeper. The revelations we've explored together today represent just one example of how individual courage can expose systematic problems that affect entire communities. Behind the scenes of what appears to be a single cold case investigation, Nathan uncovered evidence of institutional failures that had been protecting predators for decades. That's the kind of transformational impact that comes from refusing to accept easy answers to complex questions. Your decision to invest this much time in understanding the full scope of Nathan's investigation tells me that you're someone who values depth over quick conclusions, someone who understands that the most important stories often require patience and commitment to fully appreciate. That's exactly the kind of mindset that makes this community so valuable. We're all here because we believe that understanding complex realities is worth the effort it requires. If this investigation resonated with you the way it did with me, subscribing to the channel ensures you'll never miss when we dive this deep into stories that most people only hear about in simplified headlines. Write in the comments, "This investigation changed how I see everything," if you made it all the way to the end, and you're ready to explore more cases where the official narrative was just the beginning of a much larger truth. The connection we've built through following Nathan's journey together is exactly why I love creating content that doesn't insult your intelligence or rush through complex topics just to keep things moving. A like on this video helps me understand that this level of detailed investigation is what you value, and it encourages me to continue investing the time and research that stories like this one deserve. There's a video right here that complements this topic perfectly. It explores another case where institutional failures protected organized criminals for decades until one person's curiosity changed everything. Click and continue with me over there, because once you start seeing these patterns, you'll never look at official explanations the same way again.